All right, so let's dive into something that's been all over the place lately. Uh, Black voices in politics, especially with, Trump still being around.
Yeah, it's 2025, and
Yeah.
Trump is
Still a factor.
very much a factor.
Yeah.
We have a great article called The Tension of Identity, Black Voices in 2025, Trump's Politics. And it, digs into how Black communities are dealing with, all this political
They're
stuff.
clacks, right?
It's really fascinating because it's not, your typical political analysis. It gets into identity, representation, all tangled up with power dynamics in a country that's still wrestling with its past.
Yeah. And it feels like really pivotal right now.
It does.
Like we're at this point where all this historical stuff is smashing into like what's happening today.
Absolutely. One of the first things the article brings up is this tension, in Black communities between individual action versus the need to speak with one voice.
Yeah.
It's can I make a difference on my own? Or do we need to all be on the same page to tackle these issues that affect us all?
Yeah.
You know?
And it feels like there's not like a simple answer, especially when you look at how Black communities feel about Trump.
Right.
Like there's a whole spectrum of opinions.
Exactly. The article points out that some Black voters actually, support Trump, while others are completely against his ideology and everything he stands for.
Yeah.
It shows how complex identity really is and how it affects the political landscape.
It's like you can't just lump everyone into one group just because
Absolutely not.
of, this one thing they have in common.
No,
But,
exactly. Everyone's got their own experience.
it reminds us that everyone has like their own life experiences,
Yeah.
values, priorities.
Yeah.
And that's all part of their perspective.
Exactly.
But to really get what's happening in 2025, we need to look back a bit, right?
Definitely. You can't just jump into the present without understanding the history of Black voices in American politics. It's long, it's complicated.
Oh, yeah, we're talking centuries of being shut out of the political process, right?
Right.
Starting with slavery and then through Reconstruction.
Yeah.
And even with the 15th Amendment, which, was supposed to give Black men the right to vote, Jim Crow laws just totally undermined all that progress.
Those Jim Crow laws, they really messed things up. They created this deep-rooted discrimination that directly affected voter participation for generations.
Yes.
It was bad.
And it wasn't really until the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s that things started to shift.
Right.
Think about people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks. Their activism led to massive changes, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Yeah, those were huge victories, but the fight for true equality,
Oh, yeah.
it's not over. Even with more Black people holding office now, voter suppression tactics and systemic inequalities, they're still a problem. Progress isn't always a straight line, We're still dealing with the fallout from all that injustice in the past.
Okay, so we've got the historical background. But how did Trump, specifically change things for Black communities? The article talks about his rhetoric from way back in 2016, creating a really divided atmosphere around race and identity.
Yeah, and it was happening at the same time as the Black Lives Matter movement was taking off, bringing police brutality and systemic racism to the forefront.
So you had this clash between what Trump was pushing and this growing demand for social justice and racial equity.
Definitely.
It must have been so tough for Black voters.
It was. The article talks about how they were trying to balance their loyalty to the Democratic Party with, actually getting their needs met.
Yeah.
There was hope at first, maybe working with the Trump administration would lead to some good changes, but for a lot of people, that hope faded.
The article talks about some specific examples, right? Like the First Step Act and criminal justice reform.
Right.
Wasn't that seen as a good thing by some?
It was, but it also started a debate.
Okay.
The First Step Act shows how hard it is to create laws that fix past injustices without accidentally making things worse, Some saw it as real progress, but others saw it as going back to those tough on crime policies that have hurt Black communities the most.
And then you had the immigration stuff, like the
Yeah.
Muslim travel ban and
Yeah.
the border wall, which a lot of people said were xenophobic and racist.
Yeah.
It's interesting how the article shows how Black voters' opinions of Trump changed over time, right?
It is.
They started off engaged, but then got more and more disillusioned.
Yeah, and that disillusionment, that's really important to understand why these grassroots movements popped up.
Right.
But before we get into that, I think we should talk about how the media shapes the political landscape, especially for Black voices. The media can be a megaphone or it can silence people.
Yeah, and when you look at Black perspectives, the article really criticizes, the traditional media.
Yeah.
It says that even though things have gotten a bit better with like diversity and all those deep-seated biases and stereotypes, they're still there, like
Yeah.
affecting how Black people and communities are shown in the news.
It feels like they're always being filtered, like their real experiences aren't getting through.
Exactly.
It makes it harder for people to hear them, to understand them.
Absolutely.
And that's where social media comes in, right?
Right.
The article talks about how platforms like, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, they've given Black voices this way to like tell their own stories.
Yeah, it's like they can finally go around those old gatekeepers
Right.
and speak directly to so many more people.
It reminds me of the Black Lives Matter movement. That was like a perfect example of how Black activists use social media to like get organized, show solidarity, demand justice.
Yeah. In a way that just wasn't possible before.
It was huge, like a total game changer.
Yeah.
But social media, it's not perfect.
Oh, yeah.
The article talks about misinformation, harassment online, and even those algorithms, they can still be biased.
So it's like a good thing and a bad thing at the same time.
It is. It gives Black voices power, but they can also be like attacked in new ways.
What stands out to you about all that?
Well, it makes me think about how we all got to be careful, like really critical about the information we see, especially online.
Yeah.
We have to think about where it's coming from and like recognize that bias can be everywhere, not just in the regular news, but online too.
Yeah. It's about asking, like, who's telling this story?
Exactly.
What am I not seeing? Am I letting my own biases affect what I'm understanding?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about media, but the article also talks about how these grassroots movements have just exploded. Like they're responding to all this complexity.
Yeah, they're stepping up where the traditional systems have failed, creating spaces for communities to come together, to feel empowered, to take action.
What's so cool is that they're really focused on their local communities.
Yeah, it's not just about national politics. It's about what people need right here, right now.
Yeah.
We're holding town halls, putting together community forums, running these campaigns online, registering voters, pushing for policy changes, holding those elected officials accountable.
It shows you that change can start small. It's people coming together to solve problems in their own backyards.
Exactly.
It's inspiring, but like these movements face so many obstacles, right? Like voter suppression, all those disinformation campaigns.
They do.
It's amazing they keep going.
It is, but they're resilient, These Black communities, they're determined.
Yeah, it's like they refuse to be silenced.
It is.
It's about taking back control, shaping their own future.
And that brings us back to Trump, The article says these movements are like a direct response to his style of politics.
Yeah, it's pushing back against all those policies and that rhetoric that so many people see as like harmful and divisive.
Exactly.
They're trying to build something different.
They are. And there's another piece to this,
Okay.
The article talks about intersectionality, which I think is really key to understanding all this.
This is where Kimberly Crenshaw comes in, right?
Yeah.
With her idea of how different parts of who you are, your gender, class, sexuality, all come together
Exactly.
to create like your own unique experience.
Right. And for the Black community, that means understanding that Black isn't just one thing, You can't just put everyone in the same box.
So like a Black woman's experience might be totally different from a Black man's or someone who's non-binary.
Exactly.
And then there's like money, socioeconomic status.
Right.
It makes a difference.
It does. The challenges someone faces, like if they're a lower income Black person, are going to be way different from someone who's wealthy.
And then you add race and sexuality on top of that. Like the LGBTQ plus Black community, they face a whole other set of struggles.
They do. It's a lot to unpack.
Why do you think this idea of intersectionality matters to, the people listening?
I think it challenges us to go beyond those simple labels,
Yeah.
And to see the real diversity within the Black community and any community for that matter.
It's acknowledging that there's a whole range of experiences and perspectives within any group, right?
Excellent.
And to me, it's about making sure everyone's voice is heard, that policies are designed to work for everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The history, Trump's impact, the media, those powerful grassroots movements, and this idea of intersectionality.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What does the future hold?
Well, the article points to this new generation of Black leaders who are like changed the game in some really cool ways.
They are, and that's where things get really interesting. This new generation, they're not waiting around for anyone to tell them what to do. They're not following the old playbook.
Yeah.
And they're using technology to make real change happen.
It's like they grew up online.
They did it.
They know how to use social media to organize, to get people moving, to get their message out there.
Exactly. The article talks about campaigns that went viral and then turned that online energy into like real action.
Yeah.
Voter registration, fundraising for social justice, getting people out to vote. It's all happening online.
It's amazing to see how they're using these tools to change like the whole political scene.
It is.
But it's not just about like your tactics, right? This generation feels different.
They do.
Like they're driven by a different set of values.
Absolutely. There's this real commitment to social justice, to inclusivity, to equity. It feels like genuine, urgent. They're not just talking the talk. They're putting those values into action.
Yeah. And they're changing what it means to be politically engaged. You know? They're not afraid to challenge the way things are or to tackle all sorts of issues.
Right. The article talks about how they're focused on intersectionality and how they're taking on things like environmental justice, reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights.
Yeah.
It's not just about what people traditionally think of as black politics.
Right. It's about understanding that all these issues are connected, right?
They are.
You can't fight for racial justice without fighting for economic justice, for gender equality, for the rights of all marginalized groups.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
They're building coalitions, supporting each other, creating this wave of change.
It's pretty inspiring, but let's be real, they're also dealing with the mess Trump left behind.
Right.
And all the systems he made stronger.
That's the big question. What does the future of black political engagement look like in this post-Trump world? What are the hurdles? What are the possibilities?
Yeah.
The article's honest about the challenges.
Wow.
It talks about that history of voter disenfranchisement and how so many black voters feel like their vote doesn't really matter.
It's like, what's the point?
Yeah, and that's why those grassroots movements are so important.
Yeah.
Doing the hard work, getting people registered, educating them about the issues, reminding them that their voices have power.
Especially like younger generations who might be like turned off by it all.
Exactly. Showing them that their vote is their voice and that by participating, they can build the future they want.
So voter engagement is key.
It is.
But what about like teaming up with others?
Yeah.
How can black communities build real political power in this crazy system?
Well, the article suggests that working with other marginalized groups is really important. It's about finding common ground,
Right.
Building coalitions.
Working together to fix systemic racism, economic inequality, environmental injustice, stuff like that.
Exactly. These are problems that affect so many communities.
Yeah.
And by joining forces, they can have a bigger impact, push for real change.
And this goes back to intersectionality, right? Understanding that these struggles are all linked and that fighting for each other actually helps everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got voter engagement, we've got strategic alliances, but we can't forget about policies.
Right. Policies shape the future.
Yeah.
The article wants people to be really aware.
Yeah.
Like, pay attention to how potential changes, whether it's about voting rights, education, healthcare, or the justice system, might affect black communities.
Policies aren't just ideas.
They're not.
They have real consequences. They can lift people up or hold them down, give them power, or take it away.
Exactly. So it's not enough to just know about these policies. You have to get involved, fight for solutions that are fair, and hold those elected officials accountable.
So much of what we've talked about is about like the whole community.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, what about like what each of us can do as individuals? What can we do to help create a more just and equal political system for black communities?
It can feel overwhelming, given how big these problems are.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with educating ourselves.
Yeah.
Learning about the issues, both the history and what's happening now.
There's so much out there. Books, documentaries, podcasts like this one, organizations doing amazing work.
It's about seeking out those resources, being open to learning, unlearning, and challenging our own views.
And then taking what we learn and doing something with it.
Exactly. It's not enough to just sit there and absorb information.
Yeah.
You have to support the organizations that are already fighting for change. There are tons of grassroots groups, advocacy organizations, community initiatives led by black people for black people.
And there are so many ways to support them.
There are.
Donating money, volunteering our time, sharing their message online, showing up at events.
Exactly. It's about understanding that their fight is our fight,
Yeah.
and that we all benefit from a society that's more just and equal.
So we're educating ourselves, we're supporting those organizations. But what about in our own lives?
Right.
With our friends, our families, at work, what can we do there?
That's where it gets really interesting. It's about having those tough conversations.
Yeah.
With our friends, our families, our colleagues, calling out racism and bias when we see it, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Speaking up for change.
Not being afraid to challenge the way things are.
Right, and it's not always about arguing.
Yeah.
It can be about sharing information, listening to different points of view, finding common ground, building bridges instead of walls.
Like that, building bridges.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is all about, right?
It is.
Creating a society where everyone is more connected, where things are more just, more equal.
Nicely put.
So, as we wrap up this deep dives, I want to leave everyone with this thought. The future isn't set in stone.
It's not.
It's being written right now, and we all have a part to play in shaping it.
We do.
The challenges are real, and Trump's influence is still out there, but there's also a lot of hope,
There is.
We have this new generation of leaders stepping up, those grassroots movements are mobilizing, and there are so many people committed to creating a better world.
There are.
It's a reminder that change takes time.
It does.
It takes effort, and it takes all of us working together.
Let's do this.
Until next time, keep diving deep, stay curious, and never stop fighting for a more just and equal world.